The moment you become too available, your value begins to fall. Not because you became weaker, but because people rarely respect what feels endlessly accessible. What is always there gets assumed. What is always speaking gets filtered out. What is always offered stops feeling valuable. That is one of the coldest laws of power. Scarcity creates weight. Distance creates curiosity. Limited access creates value. Most people do the opposite. They think constant availability makes them important. They think instant replies make them relevant. They think always saying yes makes them respected. They think more access creates more loyalty. But very often, it creates less respect. Because availability changes perception. It tells people your attention is easy to get. It tells people your time is flexible. It tells people access to you has no real cost. And once access has no cost, it stops feeling valuable. This applies everywhere, in relationships, at work, in status, in negotiation, in friendship, in leadership. The person who is always there becomes background. The person who is always ready becomes expected. The person who is always present loses mystery. And mystery is one of the hidden engines of power. Machiavelli understood something most people still resist. Power is not only force, it is perception. And perception is shaped by absence as much as presence. Sometimes what you withhold creates more impact than what you display. Sometimes stepping back increases your weight more than stepping forward, because human beings are not only moved by what they have, they are moved by what they might lose. That is why scarcity matters. Scarcity sharpens attention. Scarcity changes behavior. Scarcity creates emotional gravity. When something feels limited, people focus. When something feels uncertain, people lean in. When access is no longer guaranteed, appreciation rises. That is why the powerful are rarely too available. Not because they enjoy being cold, not because they are playing games, but because they understand that unlimited access weakens position. If everyone can reach you whenever they want, your time loses structure. If everyone can interrupt your focus, your presence loses force. If everyone can expect your energy on demand, your attention stops feeling valuable. And attention is value. Your attention is time, it is life, it is energy, it is focus, it is a piece of your existence that cannot be recovered once spent. Weak people give it away casually. Powerful people allocate it deliberately. That is the difference. This is not cruelty. It is discipline. It is the refusal to let your value collapse through overexposure. Because overexposure creates familiarity. And familiarity, unmanaged, often reduces respect. People start assuming your presence, assuming your patience, assuming your yes, assuming your emotional labor, assuming your time belongs to them. And once that assumption settles in, your leverage begins to disappear. This is why so many people feel invisible while being constantly present. They give too much, too fast, too often, with too little friction. And friction matters, because friction reminds people that access has a boundary. Without boundaries, value spreads too thin. Without absence, presence becomes ordinary. The truth is simple. The more endlessly available you become, the easier it is for others to consume you without feeling your worth. That is why one of the most important moves in power is learning how to withdraw access without guilt. Not forever, not dramatically, not emotionally, strategically, calmly, precisely. Because once people understand that access to you is not automatic, their behavior changes. And behavior is where power becomes visible. Look closely at how people behave around someone who is always available. They delay respect. They test limits. They become careless with time. They ask for more than they should, not always consciously, but predictably, because the mind adjusts to abundance. What is abundant feels cheap. What is limited feels important. That is why scarcity changes the emotional temperature of every interaction. A delayed response can carry more weight than an instant one. A measured appearance can carry more force than constant visibility. A person who is not always available makes the moment of access feel more serious. This is not only social, it is psychological. People invest more attention in what is not guaranteed. They remember what is intermittent, they notice what can disappear. That is why absence can increase presence, not physical presence, psychological presence. When you are always there, people stop feeling your arrival. When you are less available, your arrival regains force. Your words land with more weight because they are not endlessly flooding the environment. This is one reason selective people often appear more powerful than accessible people. The accessible person becomes common. The selective person becomes significant. And significance is a form of power. You can see it in work. The person who says yes to every request becomes overloaded and undervalued. The person whose time is protected becomes harder to waste. Soon people prepare more carefully before approaching them. They think more. They choose better words. They respect limits they would ignore in someone else. Why? Because scarcity changes behavior. It introduces consequence. It reminds people that not everything is automatically available. The same applies in relationships. The person who is always texting, always chasing, always ready, slowly loses altitude. Not because care is weakness, but because over-availability reveals dependency. And dependency invites imbalance. The one who needs access more loses leverage. The one who fears distance more becomes easier to control. That is why neediness is not just unattractive. It is strategically dangerous. The person who cannot tolerate absence becomes a prisoner of response. A delayed message disturbs them. A cold tone destabilizes them. Distance terrifies them. And once someone can disturb you through distance, they hold power over your state. That is why the disciplined person learns to survive space, to survive silence, to survive delayed contact without collapsing into panic or pursuit. Because the one who cannot endure absence will always bargain from weakness. Power requires internal fullness. It requires the ability to stand alone without immediately trying to fill the gap. The moment you cannot bear the gap owns you. And this is where scarcity becomes more than a tactic. It becomes self-respect. You are saying, my attention is not public property. My energy is not on permanent demand. My time is not an open gate. My presence is not something others can assume without care. That message changes everything. Because once you stop behaving like unlimited supply, others stop treating you like common material. This does not mean disappearing for effect. It means refusing overexposure. It means keeping some distance between what people want from you and what they automatically receive. That weight is crucial, because value without weight gets consumed. Value with weight gets respected. This is the mistake so many ambitious people make. They think being useful is enough, but usefulness without scarcity often turns into exploitation. You become needed, but not respected, wanted, but not valued, used, but not elevated. That is not power. Power begins when usefulness is combined with selectivity, when people know you can help, but not any time, when people know you can appear, but not on command, when people know you can give, but not endlessly. Then your value stops feeling casual. Then your presence stops feeling ordinary. Then your absence starts speaking on your behalf. So, how do you apply this without becoming cold, fake, or theatrical? First, stop responding to everything immediately. Instant response is not always care. Often it is compulsion. Create a gap between contact and reply. Not to play games, to protect rhythm, to remind yourself that your attention is chosen, not extracted. Second, stop over-explaining your absence. Weak people apologize for every boundary. Powerful people set structure and move on. You do not need a speech every time you protect your time. You do not need to justify every delay. You do not need to make everyone comfortable with your limits. Third, reduce unnecessary visibility. Not everyone needs constant access to your thoughts, your plans, your moods, your schedule, and your attention. Overexposure lowers intrigue. Selective visibility restores weight. Fourth, become harder to interrupt. Create real blocks of focus where no one gets casual access to you. This changes not only productivity, it changes your presence. Because a person whose attention cannot be easily broken feels more powerful than a person constantly pulled in every direction. Fifth, stop chasing every signal. Do not run after every slow reply. Do not overcorrect every silence. Do not rush to repair every small distance. Sometimes the strongest move is to leave space untouched. Let the gap test the structure. What survives space has strength. What dies without constant contact was weak already. Sixth, build a life full enough that availability is no longer your identity. Purpose creates natural scarcity. Standards create natural scarcity. Discipline creates natural scarcity. A serious life makes you more selective without performance. That is the ideal, not pretending to be rare, becoming genuinely occupied by something that matters. And finally, remember this. Scarcity only creates power when there is substance behind it. Empty absence is nothing. But meaningful absence creates gravity. Anyone can disappear. Not everyone can become more valuable through distance. For that, there must be character, competence, direction, self-respect. When those things exist, withdrawal gains force. Now, your silence says something. Now your boundaries change behavior. Now your limited access increases value instead of simply creating emptiness. That is the real lesson. Do not be endlessly available. Do not flood the world with unrestricted access. Do not let people assume your time, your energy, or your presence belongs to them by default. Withdraw access where necessary. Create standards. Create space. Let that space restore the weight of your presence. Because in the end, power is not only what you give, it is also what you withhold. Respect is not only earned by what you show, it is shaped by what remains limited. And value is not only built through visibility, it is often built through controlled absence. The person who is always there becomes ordinary. The person who knows when to step back becomes significant. That significance creates tension. That tension creates respect. And that respect creates power. So remember this. Do not disappear out of insecurity. Do not withdraw to manipulate. Withdraw because your time has value. Withdraw because your attention is expensive. Withdraw because your presence should mean something. Become harder to reach. Become slower to give access. Become rarer in the places where you were once too available. Because what is too available gets consumed. But what is scarce, structured, and self-respecting begins to command a different kind of attention. Comment. Withdraw access.